Brazil was becoming the largest importer of African slaves in the world. The Portuguese had discovered that sugar was wealth, and sugar demanded blood. On the plantations, slaves worked from sunrise to death. The lash of the whip, the hunger in the belly, the endless cycle of labor. Those who disobeyed were beaten, branded, or executed. There was no escape, at least that's what the masters believed. But deep in the forests of Alagoas, where the mountains rose and thick jungles covered the land, something stirred. The first escapes were small, a handful of men slipping into the night, their wounds still bleeding from whips, their feet carrying them blindly into the unknown. Some died of hunger, others were caught and dragged back in chains. But a few survived. They found one another. They built fires in hidden caves, shared scraps of stolen food, and swore never to return. Soon others followed. What began as scattered fugitives slowly grew into something more. Villages hidden in the forest, crops planted in secret clearings, weapons fashioned from stolen iron, a society in the shadows. And soon it would become something far greater, a kingdom that the Portuguese would come to fear. It would be called Palmares. By 1605, the hidden villages had grown into a confederation. Palmares was not a single town. It was a network of settlements, linked together by trails invisible to outsiders. Each settlement was called a Mocambo, meaning hideout. Dozens of Mocambos formed across the mountains, connected by messengers and guarded by warriors. At its height, Palmares held more than 20,000 people. It was no longer just a refuge for escaped slaves. Indigenous allies joined. Poor whites and deserters came too. All were bound by one law: freedom within Palmares. The Portuguese viewed it as a disease, an infection spreading through the land. To the colonists, it was unthinkable. An entire society of free black men and women living outside their control. Palmares had leaders. Councils governed its people, and warriors defended its borders. Villages built wooden palisades, lookout towers, and traps along hidden paths. They farmed cassava, maize, and beans. They bred animals. They even traded with nearby settlers in secret. This was no temporary refuge. This was a nation, but it was a nation born in defiance. And the Portuguese would never allow it to survive. The war for Palmares had begun. The first Portuguese expeditions struck like lightning. Soldiers marched into the forests, burning fields, killing fugitives, and dragging captives back in chains. But Palmares was not so easy to kill. The warriors knew the forest. They struck from ambush, attacking supply lines, vanishing into the trees before the soldiers could regroup. Campaign after campaign was launched, and yet Palmares endured. Sometimes the Portuguese destroyed villages, only to find them rebuilt within months. Other times they were lured into traps and massacred. The colonists called Palmares a nest of devils, a place where savages and rebels plotted against Christian rule. But in truth, it was their own cruelty that had created it. As decades passed, Palmares only grew stronger. Raids freed more slaves. Children were born into freedom. The settlements expanded. Their defenses hardened. The Portuguese realized they were not fighting bandits. They were fighting a nation. And at the heart of this nation, a leader would rise. A warrior whose name would become legend. His name was Zumbi. Zumbi was born in Palmares in 1655. Unlike many who came to the settlement, he was not born in chains. He was born free, but his childhood was stolen. Portuguese soldiers captured him as a boy and delivered him to a priest, who baptized him, taught him Latin, and raised him in the ways of the church. They thought they had erased his past, but they had only sharpened his spirit. At the age of 15, Zumbi escaped. He vanished into the forests and returned to Palmares. There he took up arms. Zumbi became a warrior, leading raids against plantations, striking fear into the Portuguese. His knowledge of European tactics, combined with his mastery of the forests, made him unstoppable. By the 1670s, Zumbi had risen to leadership. He refused peace with the Portuguese. He refused compromise. His dream was simple: Palmares must remain free, no matter the cost. Under Zumbi, Palmares became a fortress. Villages united under his command. Warriors drilled and trained. Farms fed thousands. For the Portuguese, it was a nightmare. An African king ruling a hidden empire in their colony. They knew that as long as Zumbi lived, Palmares would never fall. In 1694, the Portuguese prepared their greatest assault. Thousands of soldiers marched into the forests, carrying muskets and cannons. This was no raid, it was a war of extermination. Their target was Macaco, the capital of Palmares. Macaco was a fortress city, hidden deep in the mountains. Its palisades rose high, guarded by warriors armed with spears, bows, and stolen muskets. Women and children sheltered inside as the drums of war thundered in the forests. The Portuguese attacked. Cannon fire shattered the wooden walls. Flames spread through the city. Warriors fought desperately, but the enemy was too many. The capital burned. Hundreds were killed. Thousands were captured. Palmares was dying. But Zumbi escaped. For a year, Zumbi waged a desperate war. With only fragments of his army left, he struck from the shadows, refusing to surrender. The Portuguese hunted him relentlessly. Finally, in 1695, betrayal sealed his fate. A captured comrade revealed his location. Soldiers ambushed him in the mountains. Zumbi fought, but he was wounded and taken. They beheaded him. His head was displayed in Recife, a warning to all who dared resist. But instead of fear, it inspired legend. Zumbi became a symbol of defiance, a hero who refused chains. Palmares was gone, but its spirit lived on. For nearly 100 years, Palmares had stood against the might of empires. Born from the whip and the chain, it became the largest community of free Africans in the Americas. It was proof that freedom could be won, even in the heart of slavery. Today, Zumbi is remembered across Brazil. His death date, November 20th, is celebrated as Black Consciousness Day, a day to honor the fight for equality and freedom. Palmares was not just a hidden kingdom. It was a dream, carved from the jungle, defended with blood, and carried into history by those who refused to bow. Palmares was not only a fortress of war, it was a living world. Behind the palisades, families built homes of mud and wood, their roofs thatched with palm leaves. Fires burned in clay ovens, filling the air with the smell of cassava bread and roasted maize. Children ran barefoot through the fields, free from the whip. They learned to hunt with bows, to track in the forests, to dance to the drumbeats of Africa. Elders told stories from distant homelands, tales of kings, warriors, and spirits carried across the ocean in memory alone. Though slavery had tried to erase them, here those memories were alive. Women worked the farms, wove baskets, brewed medicines from herbs hidden in the forest. Some even fought alongside the men when the walls were threatened. Palmares was not chaos, it was organized. Villages had chiefs and councils. Disputes were settled by leaders, not overseers. Laws were made by choice, not by chains. And in the heart of Palmares, the capital of Macaco rose like a hidden city. At its height, Macaco had thousands of people, streets, workshops, markets, even places of worship. To the Portuguese, Palmares was savage rebellion. But in truth, it was a society more just than the one outside its walls. It was a taste of freedom, and that taste was worth dying for. Freedom did not come without blood. Palmares grew because its warriors struck back against the plantations. At night, bands of fighters moved silently through the forests, following hidden trails that led to the sugar fields. They struck like ghosts, burning cane, killing overseers, and freeing the slaves chained inside. Those who escaped were led back to Palmares. Some came willingly, others hesitated, afraid of punishment if they were caught again. But once inside the hidden villages, they saw something they had never known: dignity. Every raid brought more people. Every victory swelled Palmares. The Portuguese hated these raids. Not only were they losing slaves, they were losing profit. To the colonists, every runaway was stolen property. To Palmares, every runaway was a brother or sister reclaimed. The raids were not just acts of survival. They were declarations. Slavery could not hold everyone forever. But with every raid, the Portuguese anger grew. And with anger came war. The Portuguese could not ignore Palmares. Governors demanded action. Orders were sent to generals. Destroy the settlements, kill the leaders, bring back the slaves. Soldiers were promised rewards, land, titles, wealth. Slave hunters, known as bandeirantes, were hired. These men were ruthless mercenaries who knew how to track fugitives through forests. They lived for blood and coin. Time and time again, they marched into the mountains. And time again, Palmares resisted. In 1640, the Dutch briefly seized parts of Brazil. Even they tried to crush Palmares, sending troops into the forests. But Palmares fought them off too. It didn't matter which empire came, the forest swallowed them all. But Palmares was not invincible. Every attack left scars. Villages burned. People were killed or dragged back in chains. Each victory came with loss. And still they endured. Because the alternative, chains on the plantation, was worse than death. Not all danger came from outside. Inside Palmares, unity was tested. Some leaders argued for peace with the Portuguese. If they could negotiate recognition, if they could secure a treaty, maybe Palmares could survive without endless war. One such leader was Ganga Zumba, an elder ruler before Zumbi rose to power. He believed compromise was possible. He sought peace. In 1678, the Portuguese offered a deal. Freedom for those already inside Palmares, if they accepted Portuguese rule and returned new runaways. Ganga Zumba agreed. Some followed him. But Zumbi refused. To him, freedom was not a gift to be begged from masters. It was a right to be taken and defended. He rejected the treaty, declaring that Palmares must never bow. The disagreement split the kingdom. Ganga Zumba was eventually poisoned, his peace faction destroyed. Zumbi emerged as the unchallenged leader. But the shadow of betrayal never left. The Portuguese now knew. If they could not defeat Palmares from outside, they might break it from within. And one day that chance would come. Zumbi was no ordinary leader. He was a man forged in two worlds. Raised for a time among the Portuguese, he spoke their language, knew their strategies, and understood their weapons. Yet his heart belonged to Palmares, to the forests, to the people who had never known chains. Under his command, Palmares became a war machine. Watchtowers lined the borders. Scouts patrolled the trails. Warriors trained with stolen muskets, bows, and spears. Zumbi himself fought in the front lines, his presence lifting spirits. To his followers, he was more than a king. He was a protector, a symbol, a reminder that their freedom was worth any sacrifice. To the Portuguese, he was a phantom, a rebel who would not die. Time and again they sent armies, and time and again Zumbi drove them back. But the empire's patience was running thin. By the 1690s, the Portuguese were ready to end Palmares once and for all. By the early 1690s, the Portuguese were done waiting. Palmares had survived nearly a century of war. It had embarrassed governors, ruined fortunes, and defied kings. To Lisbon, it was no longer just a nuisance, it was an insult to empire. A decision was made. Palmares would not be raided again. It would be destroyed. In 1693, the governor of Pernambuco ordered a massive campaign. Thousands of soldiers, mercenaries, and bandeirantes gathered. They carried muskets, pistols, and swords. More importantly, they carried cannons, great iron beasts dragged through the forests by oxen. Their orders were simple: erase Palmares from existence. The target was the capital, Macaco. High in the mountains, Macaco was defended by walls, trenches, and thousands of warriors. But this time, the enemy was too many. The storm was coming. The soldiers advanced through the forests, cutting paths with axes, guided by scouts who had once been captives of Palmares. On the horizon, smoke rose from the hidden city. Macaco stood proud, its palisades tall, its gates reinforced, its defenders ready. Zumbi prepared his people. Men sharpened spears. Women filled jars with boiling water and oil to pour on attackers. Children carried arrows to the walls. The Portuguese surrounded the city. Drums of war echoed through the trees. Then the cannons roared. The first shots smashed into the palisades, splintering wood and sending defenders flying. Smoke choked the air. The ground shook. Warriors rushed to plug the gaps. But the barrage did not stop. Hour after hour, cannon fire pounded the walls. Finally, the gates gave way. Portuguese soldiers poured in, muskets blazing. The battle was chaos. Spears clashed with swords. Muskets cracked. Arrows whistled. The screams of the wounded filled the air. Fire spread, devouring homes, smoke rising like a funeral pyre. Still, Palmares fought. Warriors leapt from rooftops with knives. Women hurled stones and boiling water. Even children struck at invaders with sticks. But the enemy was endless. For every soldier that fell, 10 more surged forward. Macaco was burning. The defenders held as long as they could. But the cannons had torn the walls apart, and the sheer weight of numbers broke them. One by one, the villages around Macaco were consumed. Captives were dragged away in chains. The wounded were executed where they fell. Thousands of Palmarinos were killed. Thousands more were forced back into slavery. The capital of Palmares, the heart of the hidden empire, was gone. But Zumbi lived. As flames consumed Macaco, Zumbi slipped into the forests with a band of survivors. The Portuguese celebrated victory, but they knew it was not complete. As long as Zumbi lived, Palmares lived. For a year he waged guerrilla war. From caves and ravines, his warriors struck at patrols, burned outposts, and freed captives. The Portuguese cursed his name. Soldiers whispered that Zumbi could not die, that the forests protected him, that spirits walked at his side. But Zumbi was flesh and blood, and flesh can be betrayed. In November 1695, one of Zumbi's own men was captured. Under torture, he revealed Zumbi's hiding place in the Serradões Ermeios Mountains. The Portuguese moved swiftly. Soldiers surrounded the refuge at dawn. Zumbi fought desperately, but he was outnumbered, wounded, and cornered. He was captured alive. The Portuguese wanted no doubts, no myths of his survival. They executed him, cut off his head, and carried it to Recife. There it was placed on a pike in the central square. His bloodied face stared at the crowds, a warning to all who dreamed of freedom. But instead of fear, it planted legend. Palmares was gone, its villages reduced to ashes, its people scattered, enslaved, or killed. But the dream had lasted nearly 100 years. For a century, in the heart of Brazil, a free kingdom had stood. Born from chains, raised in defiance, it had survived wave after wave of armies. And its story did not die with its fall. Zumbi became a symbol of resistance, a hero of freedom. In modern Brazil, his death date, November 20th, is celebrated as Black Consciousness Day. Palmares is remembered not as a tragedy, but as proof. Proof that even in the darkest age, freedom could be seized. It was more than a kingdom. It was a message carried through time. Empire can be broken, chains can be shattered, and the human spirit cannot be crushed.